Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and it's the 12th of June, 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So kicking off today, we have some ETF related news. Not much and not anything too exciting, but definitely news. So there was a S-1 form filed by ProShares for their spot ETH ETF here. Now, of course, I think I mentioned this the other day, ProShares was a latecomer to filing for an ETH ETF. As you can see here from James's tweets, basically they had a pretty quick turnaround in filing their 19B fee forms, and then now there's the S1 kind of form that's being filed here as well. Now, of course, this is, as I said, like not major news and doesn't really change anything here, but I did want to just quickly discuss around timelines. Now, Nate, who shared the tweet of this today, he's been a really great resource, I think, for like everyone that's been following through these ETFs. He was one of the only, I guess, like TradFi people following the ETFs that actually believed the ETH ETFs would be approved on May 23rd. So he's definitely someone in the know, definitely more bullish than most. And he thinks that, I mean, I saw another tweet before from him. He thinks that the ETH ETFs could go live for trading as early as the end of June, the end of this month. Now, you'll remember that I said recently that I think it's more likely that it's going to happen in early July, specifically July 8th. And what I meant by that was like that they would go live for trading on July 8th, as in that was when the first kind of inflows can come in, and that can happen earlier. There is no, I guess, like reason why it can't happen earlier or later, right? The July 8th date is just the date that I picked. I hope it happens earlier. I mean, I'd be glad to be wrong on this. I'm not trying to really be right. I just figured that, this is my thinking around it in terms of timelines, but it could still happen as early as late June. It really just depends on how quickly the issuers and the SEC do all this paperwork. As I've said in the past, I guess like few months, there isn't really much difference between the BTC and the ETH ETF, so there shouldn't really be much back and forth. And it feels like at this point, really, I mean, I don't think there's any rush right now to launch them in terms of like FOMO to launch them, where the issuers are like, we have to launch them right now or else we're going to miss our window sort of thing, because the markets have kind of cooled down here. And really, whether it launches in a couple weeks or in a month, I don't think it really matters, right? I don't think it's going to make a material difference here. I don't think it's going to make a material difference to the short-term kind of market action or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of timeline we're working on. So I guess you could basically say the window is late June, like late June into early July. Like that's the window there. So not too far away now from them going live. And then we'll finally get to see what the inflows look like. Now, it's going to be interesting because the ETH ETFs are launching at a completely different time to, I think, when the BTC ETFs launched, and in a different environment as well. Like if the market is still doing what it's doing now, where it basically is just going sideways, a lot of the things outside of BTC and ETH are getting absolutely wrecked, like getting very, very wrecked right now. And generally market sentiment is down because of that. I think that the launch is going to be rather, I don't know if I'd say muted, but like it'll be obviously less of an exciting thing than the BTC ETF launch. But that's not bearish. Like as I've said plenty of times on the refill before, the ETFs are a passive flow long-term vehicle. It's not something that you should be looking at every day. I know that there are some accounts that post the inflows into the BTC ETFs every day. And I look at that and I'm like, I don't really think that's relevant because there are multiple reasons why there are inflows into the ETFs. It's not just, pure buy pressure. It could be people doing the doing like a delta neutral strategy and basically capturing the funding rate via the ETFs because it's an efficient vehicle to do that. But the point is that over the long term, it is a up only kind of environment where essentially if these financial advisors say to their clients, hey, allocate up to 5% of your portfolio into crypto, into BTC and ETH, then you'll get that every paycheck, basically, because there is a lot of the money in the ETFs is from retirement accounts, and that obviously happens every week, every 2 weeks, every month, depending on when people get paid, and then that money will go in there. So as I've said plenty of times before, it's a long-term thing here, guys. Not just, and as I said, like even if the inflows aren't as, I guess, like exciting as they were for BTC, I don't think it really matters because it is a long-term play here. But in saying that, things can change very, very quickly. I think that, the market's weak right now. I mean, I even struggle to call it weak because like BTC and ETH are fine. Like I don't really consider that weak at all, but the rest of the market is very weak. So that's why when you go on crypto Twitter, for example, and you look at the sentiment, it's not great because of the fact that a lot of crypto natives, they don't hold just BTC and ETH, right, as the majority of their portfolio. They tend to go down the risk curve. They're chasing meme coins. They're chasing celeb coins. They're chasing all these other alts out there. And as I've mentioned plenty of times before, there is not really any net new money coming in besides going into the BTC ETFs and in the future the ETH ETFs. It really is just the same money sloshing around. And that money knows the game, guys. Like, everyone playing the game knows how worthless these things are. Like, people know that you don't hold meme coins long term. People know that most of those things are dog shit. People know that most of the tokens are dog shit, right? So when you're in that environment, it's very hard to have like sustained outperformance to the point where you would be able to take profits on it before getting wrecked on it, sort of thing. So we need to basically wait for, I guess, like the normal cycle to play out here, which I think is definitely, still coming. The timelines is anyone's guess at this point because of the fact that this bull market's been very weird. The timelines have been very different. But generally, I think that there's really no reason to be bearish. Like, as I mentioned the other day, there's not really any reason to be bearish, specifically on ETH and I guess BTC as well. But really, as long as ETH and BTC are in price discovery, which I think they will be, I think we'll probably see them be in consistent price discovery, maybe in like towards the end of Q2 into kind of Q3 there. We're coming up on that now, basically, guys. Like, we're not far away from that. But the logic for that is, I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons, but one big reason is that in the Northern Hemisphere, which accounts for, I actually learned this yesterday, there's 90% of the population that lives in the Northern Hemisphere and only 10% in the Southern Hemisphere, which is crazy because I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, as you guys know, in Australia. But the logic flows here is that because it is summer, because it's the warmer months, and in the Northern Hemisphere, people are outside more, right? They're not inside on their computers killing time because it's too cold outside. They're outside more. They're doing summer things. You know, there's holiday periods and so on and so forth. So people aren't as plugged in. So traditionally, based on the seasonality, if you kind of buy into this thesis, and there's plenty of evidence to support this thesis, essentially it means that the markets are just sideways, basically, or relatively weak in the long tail, which means that towards the end of the year, as it starts getting cooler and as the summer kind of subsides in the Northern Hemisphere, what you essentially get is more interest in the markets, more money coming in, and there's also other things to confluence that as well. You know, obviously there's the macro environment, which I think that there are certain macro events that play bigger parts than others, and I think this week there's a pretty big one. I think it's today actually, or tomorrow. There's a meeting with the Fed's having the FOMC meeting, and this is a very important meeting because I think everyone's now watching to see what the US does with interest rates, because the Canada and the ECB did rate cuts, and they're not going to be the last ones. And people are wondering, okay, when's the US going to do rate cuts, so on and so forth. But I think all that stuff's just going to get priced in anyway. But yeah, I mean, as I said, like, no matter which way you look at it, it doesn't really seem to be any reason to be bearish on ETH and BTC over the next 6 to 9 months, as I've mentioned before. But obviously, the other things I can't really comment on because they're so risky, and I think that they only really go up in a sustainable way, most of them, during periods where there's new money coming in, and like they're buying it because they don't know what they're buying, sort of thing. Like, they're not buying it because they think it's a good, they're not buying it because it's actually good or because it's a good long-term investment. They're buying it out of FOMO, or they're buying it because everything's just going up because there's so much money coming in. So it's good to keep on top of those kind of trends and understand which part of the cycle that you're in. And it's just getting harder and harder, though. As I said, the cycles are changing. This bull market's been very weird. I've lost a lot of my edge, to be honest, in the markets, and that's caused me to underperform ETH on some of the other assets that I've held for quite a while now, which is frustrating but also humbling, because the reason it's humbling is because it basically allows me to stay on top of things instead of getting complacent. Because if you get complacent and say, oh, the cycles are easy, they always play out the same way, and then it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do, you think, oh, okay, well, you know, I was wrong, right? I was wrong about this, and it's not as easy as I thought it was, and that's how you learn. That's how you become a better investor. So I'm glad that we have this. I'm glad things are changing. They don't stay the same. I'm glad people get humbled, because in markets, that's just the game, and you have to learn that lesson the hard way. No one can tell you. No one can basically tell you how to trade or tell you how to invest. I mean, they can, but like, it's up to you whether you listen or not. But even if you listen, doesn't mean that they were right. I think that the only thing that I've been consistently right about for a very long time now is that ETH was going to outperform pretty much everything over the long term. But that's it. Other than that, any other market calls that I think that I've kind of generally made about other assets, I don't think I've made those calls on the Refuel or any of the other podcasts that I've done. for a long time now, but just generally a lot of the stuff that I do on the public markets over the years, and I don't do much these days besides buying ETH, I've been wrong about. Maybe not against USD, but against ETH, and that is shitty because like I want to outperform ETH if I'm buying these things. I don't want to just outperform USD. I'm trying to stack ETH here. I don't really care about stacking fiat as much as I care about stacking ETH. So if I would have been better off just buying ETH instead of this other asset, then there was no point buying that asset, right? So it does humble you and it does teach you lessons. Even me being into this for 10 years now, I'm still learning, which is great. I love learning more. I love learning more about investing. Investing is not really the full-time thing. I mean, I spend most of my time on the tech, but when it comes to investing, you're always you need to always be on your feet, and you're always being humbled. You're always learning new things about it there. But anyway, I went on a little bit of a rant there about that, but I figured it was important to talk about that in the midst of, I guess, as I said, I struggled to call it a weak market, but I guess ETH and BTC relatively strong. Rest of the market kind of weak right now, but this is just part of the game, guys. If you can't handle the volatility to the downside, you don't deserve the volatility to the upside, as the saying goes. All right, moving on to some tech-related news. So Terence from Prior Labs has a new ETH research post out today titled Block Proposing and Validating Timelines for MEV-boost, ePBS, and ePBS with MEV-boost. So I think Terence, one of his main focuses, or his main focus over the last few months and into the next few months of the future, has been ePBS, or Ethereum Proposer Builder Separation. Now, I've talked a lot about ePBS in the past. Terence isn't the only one working on it, but in this post, it's quite technical. It's not for the layman, but I figured I would just put this on your radar because in this post he basically gives a full breakdown of each of the definitions that he's using within the ePBS context or with MEV-boost and kind of what that looks like based on a bunch of different assumptions, whether there's a non-optimistic relayer or an optimistic relayer and so on and so forth. So the more technical folk among you will be interested in this, but I also wanted to bring this up because I haven't really spoken about ePBS too much lately. There is a lot of work going on with it, but it's quite technical and I didn't feel a lot of it was relevant to you guys. I kind of wait until these things become clearer and become more concrete in their specs before bringing it up with you guys too often, because as I've said about a lot of these things, they tend to change a lot over time because they're in the research phase. In the research phase, anything can change. Literally any part of what is being researched or what is being proposed can change. So, and that means that it can look completely different from day one of when it was proposed as like a research item to when it actually makes it into the network there. And a lot of the times these things don't even get to that point. They don't even get an EIP because they just don't make much sense. But yeah, you can go give this ETH research post a read from Terence. And then was another related post from Tony here with regards to MEV-boost titled Blobs, Reorgs, and the Role of MEV-boost. Now, the TLDR of this is that Tony was looking at what the incentives are for each of the, I guess, actors within the MEV-boost pipeline here, specifically builders. So he says here, builders might have an incentive to not include blobs because of the higher latency they cause. Non-MEV-boost users include on average more blobs in blocks than MEV-boost builders, and then so on and so forth. So you can give this a read, but it's really in the context of blobs. I should have mentioned that at the start there. Sorry, I forgot to mention that there. But it's really in the context of blobs. And I think I remember talking about this on the Refuel maybe a month ago or a month or two ago, where essentially because blobs is this new primitive and because blobs don't have as much incentive to be included in a block as other transactions do from an MEV perspective, there are periods of time where builders may not have the incentive to include blobs because of the fact that they aren't as profitable and also they cause a higher latency when it comes to MEV, it's all about latency. It definitely is a latency game. That's why we have things like timing games, which are quite toxic if taken to its logical conclusion. So Tony's been looking into that lately and he has a really great post here, which I suggest you guys go and read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But yeah, it definitely falls into the whole kind of overarching MEV research that's being done for Ethereum as part of that roadmap item. I think it's the Scourge, the roadmap item that Vitalik has on his roadmap diagram there. All right, so I mentioned yesterday that OP Stack or OP Mainnet is on stage 1 now of the decentralization journey because they had brought out their fraud proofs. Now, of course, every OP Stack chain will be able to integrate fraud proofs now, so I expect other chains to follow. It's currently live on OP Mainnet, but I expect Base and others to follow quite soon here. Now, L2Beat has the tracker live for this, so if you go to the L2Beat website, you can actually see on here that OP mainnet is now stage 1, but base is still stage 0. So this is kind of what it's going to be like for the rollups that are built using infrastructure like the OP stack, like the Polygon CDK, like what Arbitrum's got with the Orbit chains, where essentially there's going to be a piece of an upgrade or a piece of infrastructure that's released, or a software update that's released, that is applied to one chain and not the others. So there are going to be things that make sense to be applied to OP main that are not base, or to base and not blast, for example. But when it comes to something like fraud proofs, obviously that makes sense to apply to basically every OP stack chain, unless they're applying something better, such as a validity proof or a ZK, otherwise known as a ZK proof here. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think base will integrate, and some of the other larger OP stack chains will definitely integrate fraud proofs quite shortly. But then it's going to be interesting to see if they break away from that and decide that it makes more sense for them to implement validity proofs when there is an agreed upon validity proof framework that is included in the OP stack. And maybe we see OP mainnet still staying on the fraud proofs because OP mainnet is run by the Optimism team and stewarded by the Optimism team, and obviously they're all about optimistic rollups. But maybe base is like, you know what, we love the OP stack, we love the tech behind it and everything else about it, but we don't love fraud proofs. We like validity proofs, so let's include them in because it gives it, maybe a better user experience, so on and so forth. And I actually think it would make sense for base because, as you guys know, validity proofs, or I guess ZK rollups, they get cheaper the more transactions there are because they can amortize the cost of the proof generation. Now, proof generation costs are coming down bigly over time already, but then when you already have a lot of transactions on the network like base has, it makes a lot of sense for you to become a ZK rollup and to integrate validity proofs in there because you can keep costs the same, if not cheaper. So I think that's what's going to happen eventually, is you'll see base become, especially base, become a ZK rollup. I feel like Arbitrum 1, it seems like they're going to stay optimistic rollup. They've invested a lot of time into their fraud proving architecture, so it remains to be seen. I just don't see them going towards being what is it? Being a ZK rollup or integrating validity proofs anytime soon. And actually, on that note as well, I do want to mention that I made a mistake yesterday where I said that Arbitrum 1 has permissionless fraud proofs. They don't yet. They have permissioned fraud proofs still. I think there's 14 whitelisted actors that can submit fraud proofs, whereas OP stack has permissionless fraud proofs. So there's a key difference there. I got a bit mixed up there. So just wanted to clarify that. And thank you for the people who called me out on that. Always open to being called that if I make a mistake, of course. But yeah, that's kind of what I see. And in terms of timelines for base, I'm not sure when they would do it, but I feel by do it I mean become like a ZK rollup. But in terms of integrating fraud proofs, I feel like they're going to do that ASAP. It doesn't really make much sense for them to wait here, so I can't wait for them to do that there. Now, speaking of, actually, let me have a look here. Yes, speaking of, I guess, like the different stages of rollups and Optimism implementing fraud proofs, Vitalik had a great little meme here on Twitter today that he shared, where it's basically the meme of the Grim Reaper going to each door and basically knocking on the door and killing what's inside, and then going on to the next door, and each of the doors is labeled with a piece of Ethereum FUD. So the first door starts off with, Ethereum will never launch. Obviously, Ethereum launched and that FUD's dead. Ethereum will never get past the DAO fork. We got past the DAO fork. The merge will never happen. Obviously happened. L2s will not have low fees. L2s have low fees. L2s are just multi-sigs. L2s aren't just multi-sigs because we have things like fraud proofs in place and escape hatches and stuff like that. And then another door that the Grim Reaper is knocking on has a bunch of other FUD pieces, such as, the cross L2 UX is too fragmented, running a full node takes too much space, MEV centralization, and builder censorship overall. Now, the reason why I like this, and it's not something new, obviously anyone who's been paying attention to the Ethereum ecosystem or the crypto ecosystem for a while knows that what tends to happen is the haters pivot their FUD, right? They're always pivoting from one FUD to the next each time we dispel it. I remember when the main piece of FUD was that Shapala wasn't going to go live and staking withdrawals would never happen on Ethereum, which is the dumbest FUD, some of the dumbest FUD I've ever seen. But that then obviously withdrawals went live, and that FUD gets dispelled completely, and then they just move on to the next thing. So it's never really about being concerned. It's always about concern trolling. It's always about bringing up things, bringing up weaknesses, attacking those weaknesses, and then once that weakness has been kind of fixed, or once that weakness has turned into a strength, they move on to the next weakness. So there's always something new for the haters to pivot to here, and I'm glad for Vitalik highlighted this on Twitter because he has such a large following, and with Vitalik on the crypto Twitter front lines, it does a really good job of keeping Ethereum, I guess, like FUD to a minimum and basically dispelling a lot of the FUD for people, because there is still a lot out there. I mean, I've been doing this education thing for Ethereum for a very long time, since 2018, guys. And it amazes me how much FUD there is still, and how, I guess, like much mental gymnastics some of these people can do to come up with pieces of FUD. And a lot of it actually is just straight up lies. Like, there was some FUD that someone said that Consensus was going to sell all of the pre-mined ETH because they owned all of it or something like that, and because the ETFs are now live. And I looked at that, I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, this makes zero sense at all. And I think we already know that Consensus sold a lot of their ETH during the 2017-2018 period because they used it to fund Consensus. They used it to fund the company, right? So it's just like that kind of FUD that, I mean, it's just so stupid that it's not even worth people's attention. But it gets the haters going, right? It really gets the haters going. So I just wanted to highlight that Vitalik put this out today, and it worked as a really nice way to dispel a bunch of the FUD, or just show that a lot of the FUD just gets dispelled by the reality anyway, and there's no point listening to people that are trying to FUD Ethereum at this point. I mean, I think that there are a lot of good criticisms about Ethereum. There's a lot of constructive criticism out there. Ethereum is not perfect, you know, but at the same time, there are things that people say as fact that aren't fact. Like saying that L2s will not have low fees is really dumb, even, you know, pre-blobs, because we knew that blobs were going to lower the fees. We didn't know exactly by how much, but we knew they were going to lower the fees. Saying something like the merge will never happen was completely dumb, because for at least a year, at minimum, we knew that it was possible on a live kind of environment, because we were doing it on testnets. We were doing the shadow forks. And then we did it, and it went off without a hitch. It actually went so perfect that I think a lot of the researchers and developers were surprised by how well it went, because they expected something to go wrong. Obviously, when you know how the sausage is made, you expect something to go wrong. But it went so well. But the thing is that you didn't have to wait until it happened to know that it was going to happen. There was so much information out there for you to digest, and I covered it so much on the Refuel. So it's always funny when I see these things. But yeah, I don't want to dawdle too much on that one there. Just wanted to highlight that. So now moving on to the next piece of news, which I believe is something that, again, that I've been talking about for a little while here, but I'm really excited about, is that Coinbase's smart wallet now supports gasless USDC sends on Base. I talked about, I think, a few months ago about how Base has an incredible opportunity to become the de facto payments rail for Ethereum or for crypto using USDC. Now, of course, USDC is not the perfect payment currency. It is centralized. It is tied to the US dollar, or at least kind of attempting to be pegged to the US dollar, right? And it is completely and utterly centralized, and your funds can be frozen at any time for whatever arbitrary reason. So it is not something that is a censorship resistant money. But in saying that, it is a massive upgrade when you have USDC on Base over the existing fiat payment rails. Because if you're using the existing fiat payment rails, you're pretty much subject to the same kind of centralization risks and centralization vectors that you otherwise would be with USDC. So why not just get USDC and use that instead, if you can do things like do shopping online, e-commerce online, sending funds to people through Base instead of on Venmo, for example, and so on and so forth. So I'm very glad to see that Base is doing this in a gasless way for USDC sends here using Coinbase's smart wallet. And I didn't really doubt that they would do this. I always knew that they would do this, but I'm very glad to see it actually materialize, because Tether has a pretty big dominant lead over USDC right now, and that lead only grew since USDC had a bit of trouble with its peg last year. But other than that, Tether doesn't have its own layer 2, right? USDT, majority of the small payments is on Tron, which is something that Tether doesn't control. Or Tether has nothing to do with, really. It's just a circumstance of the fees were cheap there. Now, they're not so cheap anymore, but they were cheap there. And Tron had a lot of integrations with places like Binance and other big offshore exchanges. So it managed to grow quite wildly there. But I am glad to see USDC continue to grow and continue to be used in different ways, or in kind of better ways, on Base here. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's the video demo here that Nick Prince, who works in product at Coinbase, shared of basically doing this on the Base network, which is really great to see. So you can go check this out for yourself. I'll link the video in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, in case you missed it, the first episode of Into the Ether went live, for the first episode for the last 2 years, I should say, went live, and I'll link this in the YouTube description below for you to check out, but it's live on basically all the podcast apps, I believe, and on YouTube, but as I mentioned yesterday, there is no video, it's just audio, but hey, all you really need is the audio. You don't have to be staring at my beautiful face all the time and Eric's beautiful face all the time, right? You just need the audio, you just need our bullish energy, and that's what we bring in this episode, so go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. Now, I've got a few minutes left here. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the markets. I mean, I always kind of, not hate talking about this, but I always kind of feel a bit exhausted talking about this. But then I go on the Discord channel and I see everyone kind of being like, what's happening with the price? What's happening? Why are we dumping? You know, I thought the ETF was going to be bullish, so on and so forth. I just want to, again, reiterate this point of the rest of the market besides ETH and BTC is doing quite poorly right now. I mean, no one could say it's doing well. Like, they've pretty much reset their performance back to sometime last year. But ETH and BTC are doing incredibly well. I mean, you can bring up any chart you want for any time frame of ETH and BTC, and you can see just how well they're doing. Let me bring up a chart here so I can better illustrate my point. So give me a sec. I'm just gonna bring it up from a different tab here. So let me just illustrate this on my screen for you. So this is the ETH USD weekly chart here. Now, obviously, this is a long time frame. This is going back to last cycle, but if you look at the recent kind of price action here, let's say from the bottom, really, and the bottom was June of 2022, mind you, so 2 years ago now. I guess like almost 2 years to the day, 13th of June, yeah. So actually, might have been in that week. So basically, almost 2 years to the day was the bottom on ETH USD of this cycle here. Now, what has the chart done since then, guys? Like, this pop quiz, I've given you the answer in front of me, but what's the chart done since then, or what's the price done since then? It's gone up only. Yes, there have been periods of time where, you know, it goes up and then down, up and down, but the general trend, if I'm just drawing a trend line on this, is up, right? Like, and this is a really rough kind of trend line. It doesn't really fit here, but hey, the general trend is up here, and it's up since the bottom of whatever it was, 880 to today's price. It's up 300% since then. Right? That's over 2 years. Now, if I was looking at this chart and I didn't have any other context about what was happening, I was just looking at this chart, I'd be incredibly bullish. I'd be like, okay, well, like, it looks fine to me. I mean, look at this. Like, every time it goes down a bit, it just gets pumped up again. It just gets bought up again. You can see here, every time it's gone down, it's just gone up again. And it hasn't gone into a parabola phase either. Like, you can look at the last kind of cycle and look at what that looks like when it goes, you know, it goes into a parabola phase there. And then you can switch to even the monthly chart to see an even clearer picture here of what this looks like. Like, you're looking at this and I'm just like, this is really bullish. Like, this isn't, the bull market's not over here. ETH is doing incredibly well on the chart. And then, I mean, you can even go back to like the whole long-term trend of just ETH's life has been up. And BTC looks the same, if not slightly better, actually, because of the ETFs here. But then you can go to the other coins out there, obviously. A lot of the long tail of coins. I don't really want to pick on any coins. There's not really anything that I can kind of show you without picking on something besides maybe like, I think there's like an alt chart that I've forgotten the ticker for here. But essentially, you know, you look at the other things that people like to be in, and they're not doing too hot, right? Even like anything, most things in the top 10, or in the top 20, top 30, not doing too great. I think that's why people essentially are a little bit bearish here. Like, if I, you know what, I'm going to pick on one just because it's a bit of a meme. Cardano, right? Like ADA USD. Like, if you look at this and you look at kind of what it's done over, I guess that's the monthly chart. Let's go to the weekly chart here. It hasn't really done very much, right? It hasn't really been kind of that impressive in terms of price action. Yeah, it's gone up a little bit after it kind of bottomed here, but hey, it hasn't been that impressive, right? And a lot of the charts look like this. I don't want to pick on any, but I just figured I'd pick one out of random here. Whereas you something like ETH or BTC, they look a lot better, right? They look a lot better in terms of price action. I mean, you can even just see like Cardano against ETH, what that looks like. You know, it's down only, right? And a lot of charts look like this. But my point here, and this is just to illustrate showing you the charts is just to illustrate a point in that there is no need to be bearish, guys. Like, there's no need to be upset here. If you are heavy into other coins other than ETH, all I can say to you is that, like, that was your decision that you made, and that's the risk that you play. If you are going into other things, you're always risking one, underperforming ETH, and one, basically getting chopped up because these other things are so incredibly volatile compared to ETH. Like, so much more volatile compared to ETH and BTC. So from that perspective, I understand why sentiment is in the gutter, because a lot of people aren't in ETH and BTC because they want to be risk on, because they think that, oh, I'm not going to get a 10x or 100x from ETH and BTC anytime soon. You know, I need to make more money this cycle because I want to basically become financially independent. And they start making really emotional mistakes about things. They start going into projects and they're getting emotional about it when the tokens aren't going up. You know, can the devs do something? Those sorts of things. So that's kind of what's happening, I think. And I think it just gets worse over time too, because ETH and BTC are really strong and have really strong hands compared to these other things and have actual fundamental value behind them, especially ETH. As you guys know, like I've outlined plenty of times before why ETH has such strong fundamental value behind it. But yeah, that's the kind of state of play right now there. But anyway, going to wrap that today's episode up there. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.